potential coronavirus treatment, Japan has just donated tablets of its anti-flu medication, Avigan. A high-level panel will be formed to look into alleged corruption over at PhilHealth. The task force has the power to recommend preventive suspension while the probe is ongoing. The number of OFWs who died after the Beirut blast have doubled to 4. The number of Filipinos who want to be repatriated have likewise also doubled. And prepare for a different viewing experience on TV5 as the network launches a new lineup of shows this month. Let's start with the Department of Health, which is saying that the country's caseload, which now tops Southeast Asia, should not be quickly compared to the number of cases in other countries. The agency says different settings and systems should be considered. Greg Gregorio explains.
That's unfair for them to say that.
This is Health Secretary Francisco Duque's reaction to reports tagging the Philippines as the new COVID-19 epicenter in Southeast Asia. An uncoveted title now accorded to the country after topping the rest of Southeast Asia in terms of COVID-19 cases, due in part to allegedly poor government response. On Thursday, the Philippines surpassed Indonesia and Singapore in terms of total cases. But according to Duque, data on each country's case per million population must also be considered. Should this be the measure, World Health Organization data would show that the Philippines ranks second to Singapore. Duque insisted that ramp-up testing plays a part in the country's ballooning infection count.
We increase our testing, we increase our contact tracing. So you really see that. Indonesia testing rate is 3 times less than the Philippines. Tingnan mo, we're testing more now than Indonesia.
Such is the case in Marikina, which according to Duque has bolstered its contact tracing. The city expects fewer daily cases by the end of the month as they get to trace 30 individuals per one positive patient. Add to that their daily testing capacity of as much as 800.
Dahil mataas yung ating ratio na yon, 1:30, ay mabilis nating nako-contain yung pagkalat ng virus.
The city is building an additional treatment and monitoring facility with 136 beds. Teodoro admits though that there's still transmission in communities.
Ang transmission nangyayari at the household level. Baka kailangan na ring magsuot ng face mask miski nasa loob tayo ng bahay natin.
The palace, for its part, stands by what they believe is the country's improved response to the crisis.
May mga nagsasabi na masama daw itong figura dahil tayo na nga raw po ang pinakamataas. Hindi naman po ganon. Ang ibig sabihin lang nito, alam na natin kung nasan yung kalaban nating COVID-19.
Duque added that even with close to 120,000 COVID-19 cases, the country's fatality rate remains low at 1.8% compared to Indonesia's 4.7%. He says this means our case management for severe and critical cases have improved. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
Despite having the highest number of infections in the region, Interior Secretary Eduardo Año also insists that we are not losing the fight against the pandemic. He says the government is still on track with its COVID-19 response, and he says the fight is not over until a vaccine has been developed. He also is comparing the country's situation with that of hotspots like the United States and Brazil.
Sabi mo, we are actually performing poorly. Pero pag i-compare mo naman sa countries like Brazil, Amerika, Russia, India, parang matutuwa ka. Imagine naman for example, in the United States, ang namamatay 2,000 isang araw. Yun, total na natin yun, no?
Unlike Año, COVID-19 Task Force Chief Implementer Secretary Carlito Galvez admits that there have been lapses in government's COVID-19 response, specifically on testing and contact tracing.
I really feel very sorry na yung testing talaga. Medyo may pagkukunan kami din sa national.
There are now more than 122,000 COVID-19 cases in the Philippines, with an additional 3,300 infections reported today. Active cases stands at 53,000. 24 individuals have recently lost their battle to COVID-19. This brings the total death count to 2,100. On the other hand, 96 patients have survived the disease. That puts the total number of recoveries close to 67,000. The country is set to start clinical trials for Avigan. That's an anti-flu medication from Japan. That's after Manila received Avigan tablet donations for 100 patients. This is part of Tokyo's emergency grant to countries severely affected by COVID-19. But trials will not start on August 10 as originally scheduled. Some documents have yet to be sorted out.
So this trial have already been approved by the FDA for its clinical trial. Inaayos na lang namin ang final arrangements, legal documents and all, and we are set to start soon.
More nurses are complaining of burnout as hospitals remain understaffed amid the surge of COVID-19 cases in the country. They're asking government for better support as they try to save lives. Their story in this report by Camille Samonte.
Saving lives is a lifetime mission. This was the realization of Jerome, a nurse at a COVID-19 referral hospital. The other day, they saved a patient who almost died and flatlined upon arrival at the emergency room.
That person's life, I feel like, ignited a torch for everybody to understand how difficult it is right now. With every single day, it's not just the life of the patient that we're worried about. It's our life as well.
But as more COVID-19 patients are admitted, burnt out is already kicking in for Jerome and the other nurses. As they are understaffed, their duty sometimes extends beyond 8 hours.
So now, I feel like the burden has doubled. There's this huge gap between the nurse and the patient ratio right now.
The lack of nurses poses a big problem in the medical community, says the Filipino Nurses United.
Hindi naman sa ayaw maglingkod o magsilbi ang ating mga nurses. Kung hindi, wala kasing hindi nararamdaman yung compassion, yung sincere na pagkalinga ng gobyerno, assurance ng kanilang kaligtasan at kalusugan.
A deployment ban is still in place, preventing Filipino nurses from working abroad in order to supplement the alleged gap in the country's health force. Integrated Bar of the Philippines President Domingo Cayosa finds this questionable. In an interview on Agenda, he says there must be proof that the country is running out of nurses.
Pero sa ngayon, ang statistics, marami pa rin namang nurses, mga health workers, ang hindi pa unemployed. So, tama lang na maghanap sila ng trabaho abroad. So, medyo malabo yung general na hindi kayo pwedeng umalis. There are other ways by which we can address, or government can address, the need for health workers.
COVID-19 ward and ICU nurse Michael said he can't blame some of his colleagues if they decided to exit the country even before the pandemic.
Kung kami ang nag-aalaga at hindi kami inaalagaan ng gobyerno, ang hirap po magtrabaho. Kaya hindi mo masisisi ang mga nurse na bago pa mag-COVID ay umaalis ng Pilipinas.
Despite this, Michael and Jerome are still willing to serve and sacrifice, just like all the frontliners who are fighting this pandemic.
Sa totoo lang, nakakapagod po talaga, pero it's a life mission, kumbaga, and it's a life mission to save lives. Naniniwala ko it will still be worth it in the end.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
We'll pause for a short break, but when the big story returns, several government agencies are teaming up to investigate alleged corruption in PhilHealth. The palace says the task force may end the problem in the agency once and for all. And more casualties from the explosion in Beirut are being reported. Traumatized OFWs are now seeking help to get home as soon as possible. That story after the break. I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. The Justice Department is calling for a high-level task force to investigate alleged corruption hounding PhilHealth. Aside from the DOJ, the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Audit, Executive Secretary, the Ombudsman, and the Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission will also be part of the probe. Palace spokesman Harry Roque says this will not be any ordinary investigation, as the task force will be allowed to issue preventive suspensions on PhilHealth officials.
From the wordings po of the memorandum, mukhang exasperated na po ang presidente, no? Kasi napakadami na pong investigasyon na ginawa ng Kamara at ng Senado dito sa PhilHealth, pero wala pa rin po nangyayari dyan sa PhilHealth.
Malacanang says the task force should end alleged corruption within PhilHealth.
So ang mensahe po sa mga buhaya ng PhilHealth, tapos na po ang maliligayang araw nyo dyan. Goodbye.
The number of Filipinos killed in the Beirut blast has doubled, while more and more OFWs are requesting repatriation. Marian Enriquez joins us live from Manila to give us the latest. Marian, what's the update on our kababayans in Beirut?
Robbie, the Philippine Embassy in Lebanon reports 2 more Filipino household service workers died in the Beirut blast, while the number of injured is now at 34.
Father Bienvenido Dulfo Jr. has been in Beirut for 3 years now, serving as a spiritual director in a Catholic church there. He was among those who immediately posted on social media the damages caused by the explosion. He also checked on the condition of Filipinos there.
Ngayon, karamihan nasa bundok. Merong mga bahay po ang kanilang amo doon. So, many of them are in the mountains. Mas maganda doon, malamig-lamig.
Being a spiritual guide of most Filipinos working and residing in a foreign country, Father Dulfo knew how important it is to bring hope amid a tragedy.
Sabi ko, God is very good. God really takes care of us.
The Philippine Embassy in Lebanon reports 2 more Filipino household service workers died in the blast, while the number of injured is now at 34. Initially, the embassy was supposed to bring home 230 OFWs who already have exit visas and are scheduled to go home. But they are now repatriating 400 OFWs, as many have expressed interest to return home after the blast. Filipinos in Lebanon who wish to be repatriated should register via Google Forms posted on the Facebook page of the Philippine Embassy in Lebanon. Repatriation efforts of the Philippine government have been ongoing since last December. There are over 33,000 Filipinos in Lebanon, and around 2,400 have already been brought home to the Philippines.
Kasi lahat ng mga Pilipino na bago sila umalis dito, kailangan po silang grantan ng visit visa. So kailangan po natin yung tulong ng ating mga colleagues sa immigration po ng Lebanon. Unfortunately po, sarado po yung mga opisina ngayon ng gobyerno ng Lebanon dahil may national days of mourning na tinadaan po ang bansa.
Robbie, the Philippine Embassy in Lebanon has said that 2 Filipinos remain in critical condition and are now being monitored at the Risk Hospital. Those who are still in need of assistance are advised to call their hotlines or leave a message on their Facebook page. Robbie.
Maraming salamat, Marian Enriquez. The United States is reiterating its support for Southeast Asian nations with sovereign claims in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. In a phone call with Foreign Affairs Secretary Teddy Locsin, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo discussed Washington's latest policy declaration on maritime disputes. That latest policy affirms the country's 2016 arbitral award, which invalidated China's 9-line claim. Pompeo described his conversation with Locsin as a good call. It's not clear, though, if President Duterte's directive to ban the country's participation in naval exercises was discussed. And these are the other big stories today. Morose and civil society leaders filed the 26th petition before the Supreme Court seeking to nullify the anti-terror law. The group said it violates rights to free speech, expression, and self-determination and might potentially lead to red tagging. They also argued that the anti-terror law violates IP's rights to self-determination and would put more peoples in grave insecurity. The National Bureau of Investigation is trying to verify the reported death of a certain Christinabauer, believed to be a former executive of scandal-hit German payments company Wirecard. Justice Secretary Minardo Guevara says the Bureau is trying to look at all relevant records tied to Bauer's alleged death and whether he is the same Bauer being investigated in connection to the $2 billion cyber heist involving Wirecard. 1 in 2 adult Filipinos are worried about publishing materials that are critical of the present administration. Based on the latest SWS survey, 51% agree that it is dangerous to print or broadcast anything critical of the administration, even if it is the truth. The survey was conducted from July 3 to 6, just a few days before Congress rejected the broadcast franchise bid of media giant ABS-CBN. Almost 2 weeks before the opening of classes, teachers and students alike are saying that they are still not prepared for distance learning. Even the Department of Education admits additional funding is still needed to cover online expenses. Ria Fernandez with this story.
College student Micaela Pancha noticed some disadvantages of distance learning. She says she has classmates who failed to attend school since they resumed classes.
Dahil nga po sa slow internet connection at saka po sa kawalan din po ng gadgets at data. Ang iba po sa mga estudyante po namin ay nanghihiram lang din po ng equipment sa mga magulang nila at sa yung iba po sa kapitbahay pa po nila.
Teachers also continue to complain as not all of them have their own gadgets for online classes. And with modified enhanced community quarantine in effect in Metro Manila and nearby areas, many of them are stranded in provinces with poor internet signal. Some also scramble with their preparations, including the printing of modules. A number of them have also been infected with COVID-19. Based on the data of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, 63 teachers from NCR, Region 7 and Region 10 already tested positive for the virus. The teachers themselves shoulder the testing fees.
Nakakatawa at nakakaasar, nakakagalit na kapag ang isang teacher ay nag-positive sa COVID-19 ay kahit man lang leave of absence ay hindi niya ibibigay sa teacher. Napakawalang puso.
Due to these problems, stakeholders feel face-to-face classes are also unlikely to push through in January.
Kaya nga ang panawagan ay ma-move sana itong pasukan na to. So yun naman yung sukatan. Positive naman na kasi lahat naman kahit naman tayo kami sa bayan, sa lahat ay gusto naman nating matuloy pero hindi sa soon.
The law may say August 24 dapat ang last day para magbukas. But we are in an entirely different situation right now. We are in the middle of a pandemic, the worst economic crisis in our history, at hindi po handa yung mga ahensya na magdi-deliver ng pag-aaral para sa ating mga kababayan. So, panahon na para tignan ang bagay na ito at hindi na lang po iasa kung ano yung tinatakda ng batas. Pwede naman pong i-move it. The President has the power to do that.
The DepEd has yet to comment on their safety measures for teachers. As for the educators' expenses for internet load, DepEd spokesperson Ann Sevilla said they are in talks with the budget department for funding. But she said that since June, each teacher has already been given a 3,500 cash allowance that covers supplies necessary in whatever modality of teaching. For News 5, Ria Fernandez, we are One News.
Coming up on The Big Story, some things are brewing in the Kapatid network, which include faces you may be all too familiar with. The details next. This is the big story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Just when airlines were trying to recoup losses from weeks of strict lockdown, Metro Manila's return to MECQ has them suspending a number of flights yet again. Gerard de la Peña tells us more.
NAIA feels like a ghost town once again after Metro Manila was placed under modified enhanced community quarantine. There are only international flights as domestic flights are cancelled until the MECQ is lifted. Airline companies said they only have about 100 flights a week, a significant decrease from thousands of flights per week before the pandemic. That's why budget carrier Cebu Pacific said that it will fly many of its planes to Alice Springs in Australia for long-term storage. It is also in talks with plane manufacturers if they should still push through with the orders made in the past couple of years. Airlines also said that it is impossible to mount flights at this time, even if the flights are meant to ferry locally stranded individuals back to their home provinces.
Madugo kasing i-organize ang sweeper flights and paisa-isa lang siya. So, relative to the number of people that are waiting for flights, hindi namin alam kung kailan sila makakauwi.
But nevertheless, we are working closely with our government partners para po makapag-mount tayo ng ating flights.
But while foot traffic in NAIA is low, it still houses some stranded locals. More than 100 are taking refuge at the NAIA Terminal 3. With the MECQ imposed in NCR, they have no choice but to wait for almost a month. Reggie Hancorda is one of them. He was supposed to fly to Bacolod on August 4 after he was laid off from work as a security guard. His flight has been rebooked to September 1. He now waits in the airport where life is far from comfortable.
Saka yung paligo, hirap din. Hihintay ka pa ng escort bago ka maligo. Hindi ka nga makapaglaba. Siyempre, uninspected naman. Kaya yung ilan lang ang damit sa brief ang baon ko, saka medyas.
The Hatid Tulong initiative, which helps stranded passengers get back to the provinces, will resume as soon as the MCQ is lifted on August 18. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
Given the suspension of public transportation under MECQ, motorcycle ride-hailing firm Angkas says it will provide free rides for medical frontliners starting this weekend. So how will that work? Romel Lopez tells us more.
Despite still not being allowed to operate on the roads yet due to lack of franchise, motorcycle ride-hailing firm Angkas will be ferrying passengers over the next 2 weeks for free. The free ride covers medical frontliners in MECQ areas. That's set to start on Saturday.
Kasi itong ating mga health workers, probably sa umaga, okay pa yung biyahe nila, masigla pa. Pero after their shift, ito yung mga pagod na. So naka-standby sila doon para ihatid sila bahay.
Angkas assured riders that their salaries will be paid.
One of the measures na ginagawa po ng gobyerno at ng pribadong sektor na partnership.
Angkas also donated 1,000 units of motorcycle barriers to the Philippine National Police to be distributed to precincts for medical frontliners in the area. Interior Secretary Eduardo Año tested the barriers. He vouched for the barrier's safety and its potential in curbing the spread of COVID-19. He said that there are studies showing its positive results.
Kasi ang virus ay nagtatravel by airborne. Ang nangyayari ay 30% na ating mga gumagamit ng motor. After a while, itinataas nila yung kanilang face shield. Siguro naiinitan. Kapag nagkaroon ng traffic o kaya nasa intersection, tinatanggal nila yung kanilang helmet o itinataas yung face shield. Instinct nila yan, hindi mo mapigilan sapagkat kung ang komportable na yung tao, talagang gagawin niya yung paraan para guminawa siya.
He also clapped back against the critics of the mandatory installment of plastic barriers.
Sino ba ang merong responsibilidad sa pagliligtas ng buhay? Ang ating health workers, ang ating frontliners, ang ating local and national government. Nasa kanila yan. Mangyari nga dyan, kasama sa mga mabibiktima o magkakaroon ng sakit, ang takbo niya, dito pa rin sa ating national local government, sa mga law enforcers. No?
Anyo hopes that the MECQ will not be extended as there is a need to balance the public health with the country's economy. For News 5, Romel Lopez, we are One News.
And these are the other big stories around the world. Anger is mounting in Lebanon as protesters clashed with police after they tried to approach a government building in central Beirut. Riot police were deployed after some protesters burned objects and hurled rocks at security forces. There's now rising anger against authorities for having allowed huge quantities of explosive ammonium nitrate to be stored for years under unsafe conditions. China's foreign ministry is firmly opposing orders made by U.S. President Donald Trump, which is banning U.S. transactions with Chinese-owned social media apps WeChat and TikTok. Beijing says Washington is using national security as an excuse to oppress non-American businesses. China says it will defend the rights of Chinese businesses in America and that the United States will have to bear the consequences of its actions. The U.S. is investing $1 billion in a COVID-19 vaccine being developed by Johnson & Johnson, guaranteeing 100 million doses. This should boost production so that doses are ready for shipping when the drug receives regulatory approval. So far, the U.S. has spent $9.4 trillion on vaccine agreements. Moving on to some entertainment news, the collaboration between TV5 and Signal is now in full swing, with new shows airing on the Kapatid network starting August 15. TV5 head of creatives Percy Intalan says the network positions itself as the network of the new normal. He says TV5 is in an interesting position to provide a different kind of entertainment for the audience. Intalan also dismissed rumors that the Kapamilya stars Coco Martin and Vice Ganda were supposed to transfer to the Kapatid network.
Walang umabot na show sa akin with Vice in it. Ang alam ko kasi is malaki yung plano ng viceganda.com na content niya.
Network executives also confirmed that Chris Aquino's talk show will not be airing on August 15 as initially announced, but TV5 President Robert Galang clarifies that this is just due to issues between Aquino and her production team.
Walang political pressure and we were excited about it. Sayang nga, hinihintay pa rin namin. Hindi pa naman sarado ang libro. Yeah.
Meanwhile, TV5's new shows include Chika Besh with Pokwang, Pauline Luna, and Ria Ataide. Fill in the Bank with Pokwang and Jose Manalo. Bawal na Game Show with Paolo Ballesteros and Wally Bayola. Bangon, Talentadong Pinoy, hosted by returning kapatid Ryan Agoncillo. Fit for Life with Jessie Mendiola. And Usapang Real Life with News 5 Chief Luchi Cruz Valdez. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again on Monday at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. You can also catch One News on the Signal Play app. Register for a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Robbie Alampay. We are One News. Have a happy weekend.